Hi, everybody. Welcome to Drawing X Live with me, Jedidiah Dore, an artist here at Drawing Expressions. And this is class number 4. Can you believe it? I called it Jazzing It Up. I'm going to be combining two things that I love today, music, and my favorite music is jazz, and drawing, of course, and art. What a great combination. You can't ask for more, right? So for this drawing class, we're going to be creating a modern jazz album cover. Sounds cool, right? Using a mixed media technique and like all great jazz music, a good amount of improvisation. And don't be intimidated by that. That just means you're going to be free to play and explore and experiment. Let's just get right to it because we have some music to make with our art. And improvisation, like I said, is key today, but don't be intimidated because this is going to allow us to be much more forgiving in both our mindset and our process. So let's switch over to our desktop so you guys can see. Whoops, sorry about that. Let's switch over to our desktop so you guys can see the tools that I'm using. I'm going to be using, now if you don't have all of the same exact tools, don't you worry because, it's all about spontaneity today, and you can use whatever you want in making this jazz album cover. So I brought along a few things to play around with. My usual suspects, dip pen, some brushes, my handy dandy stick that I kind of carved out. I have some waterproof ink, which is great India ink. I have some markers, some fat markers, and a few behind me that I may or may not use. We'll see. And then my watercolor set. I don't try not to have too many watercolors. You could see I use them quite often. And some pastels, some dry pastels, some chalky, chunky kind of pastels, and then a few colored pencils. Really just a few because I don't want to get overwhelmed with having too much to select from. The key is that we get right to drawing and right to designing, right? So the first step that I want you to just really to begin to integrate. Oh, I forgot one more thing. And of course the tape. This is just really just so that we can frame the composition. So if you have any artist tape, that would be great. But you can just, mark it off with a ruler. You don't have to use artist tape. It's just so that you can just go right off the edge, right off the edge, and it'll be fine. So yeah, so we're gonna thumbnail. The thumbnail is just a key aspect to drawing and designing and painting because you get to really compose the page and design the page. So that's really important. So let's take our pencil. You could use a colored pencil, by the way.
Hey Jed, before we start, will masking tape work?
Yes, masking as long as it doesn't rip the paper. Don't press it down
Okay,
too hard.
okay,
But we're really just going to make a square thumbnail, right? That's going to
okay.
be the composition is we're going to use a square thumbnail. So really just a tiny or small frame like this, right? Is really what you want to do. So let's do a couple. I like to do 2 or 3, and sometimes I'll really just make a decision right away because I get to the design that I want to create right away. And we have our instruments really just kind of laid out. We have a beautiful jazz guitar, and then we have a stand-up bass or jazz bass, and then we have a saxophone and a drum kit, right? So what I like to do really in for the composition, for the thumbnailing part, it's really just arranging the key elements and in a very simplified manner and breaking down the objects and subjects to its most basic shapes and geometric shapes. So I'm going to try one here, just to kind of experiment with it. Let's put the drum set, right? So we're looking at the drum set. And by the way, you can arrange the composition the way you'd like to see it. You don't have to use my exact composition or design. You can create your own if you'd like, right? So I'm going to put just the key shape to the drum set right here, maybe right off to the right or maybe in the middle a little bit, right? You have the stands there. And then what if we put the or stand-up bass right here? And I'm just drawing the larger shapes. I'm just drawing the outline of the shapes, right? And I'm just kind of arranging the composition here just to find some kind of design that really works, right? Because we're pretending this is either going to be a CD cover or an album cover, and they're both square, so it's a good format to design this. And then maybe if we put the guitar right behind the drum set here, let's see, let's go ahead and kind of lightly case the guitar in like that vertically, right? And I know that it's kind of lying on its side, but we know the general shape of it, of the guitar. And then we have the saxophone. Let's put the saxophone right up here, maybe a little smaller, or maybe at a diagonal, right? And it kind of loops around like so. Okay, like that. And that's, so right away, that's an interesting composition there. So what I'm really going for, I'm imagining, is that the instruments are overlapping, and it's going to create some really nice overlays and maybe some transparencies if we want, and some of the outlines, some of the contour lines to kind of overlap. So that's an interesting composition, right? So let's go for one more. So far I like that. It's a little bit too vertical, right? That's my only criticism of this thumbnail, right? And you can see how really just creating a thumbnail is such an important part, such a fun part of designing your page. Let's try another one. Let's try one that's a little bit more dynamic, right? Maybe one that has some movement to it, right? Some things kind of turned around, or maybe turned topsy-turvy. Let's see. So let's move the drum set off to the left a bit, just a tad, right? We have the Tommy right here, kind of tilted. The other, the other snare drums here, and the cymbals right here coming up like so, right? And I'm just kind of moving things around based on what I feel like should happen. And this is the other thing that happens, by the way, is when you draw this way, you start to really enhance your creativity, your imagination, and your instinct. And this, it becomes more natural the way you compose the page. So that's interesting so far. It's a bit off to the left. Let's try this. Let's kind of turn the saxophone. I kind of like it on the side. So I'm going to put it like this. Even though you can't, really see it, as long as you know, I'm going to zoom in close here so you can see it better. There we go. Right? So let's tilt it. Let's try that. Let's see what happens if we do that. Right? That's interesting. Look at that. Okay. And then the stand-up bass, let's kind of tilt it off to the side here like so. And we got this nice curve to it, and the bottom sits on the ground. I love the little curl at the top of the stand-up bass neck. That's always a very identifiable thing about a stand-up bass, right? You can add in a few details just so that you know what the subject is. That's interesting so far. It's kind of creating this triangular, this V shape, and it has a little bit more movement in this composition. And last but not least, the guitar. I'm going to use the reference, the way it looks, and I'm just going to do a really good kind of aggressive crop to it so that it's kind of running off the page like so. That's really interesting. Look at that, right? So that's pretty cool. So right away, I'm liking this a lot because it has more movement. It's a bit more dynamic. It feels a lot more like jazz, doesn't it? Feels like it's very musical. All right, so I'm going to go with this one. And it's interesting. I could have gone with this one. It would have been just fine as well. But I'm really liking this one. I like the movement in this one. I like the energy in that one. So let's go with this one. And if you want to create your own thumbnail, you want your thumbnail design and go with that one, you're more than welcome to do so, because really the process I'm going to show you is very, very spontaneous. All right, so nothing too pre-planned. I'm really just kind of going by instinct, what my gut is telling me, right? So keeping in mind when you're doing these thumbnails is that consider the negative spaces as well as the positive spaces. So for example, if we have a triangle floating in the middle of this composition, right, in this area, all this air around the triangle, that is the negative shape, right? Just we'll call it air for now. It's probably easier to think about. And this object, the subject, the key subject that we're drawing, that we're identifying, that we're painting is the triangle. This is the positive, right? And what I like to think about when I'm drawing and designing is that both are equally important. They're both of great importance, the negative and the positive. So when you're drawing, think of both the negative shapes and positive shapes, right? Great. So let's go with this one. And so now that we have the thumbnail, if we stick to this composition, we're going to be in good shape, right? So remember, so what we omit is equal in importance as what we include, right? All right, so let's move on and let's go ahead and start penciling in either with color pencil or graphite. You could go right to inking if you want. That's perfectly okay. But let's go ahead and create a square shape here, right? I won't go too big. I have my ruler here. Let's see. Let's make nice, maybe a 6-inch is probably a good shape for it, right? So I'm going to start here and just, where is the edge? There it is. Kind of, there we go. And same thing here. I need to draw a little mark there so I can tell where it starts. Right. And you don't need to be that perfect with the square. We're just, trying our best to create something close to being a square so that we have straight edges, right? And the reason why you want to do this is that you can kind of paint and color right off of the page, right? You can let the colors kind of bleed off the page and you don't have to worry about it being painting or coloring right to the edge, right? So I have my artist tape here. I'm going to take just some strips of it and I'm just going to tape the edge just like that. And that's going to give me a good reference to the top edge and how the bottom will go parallel, right? So easy peasy, just find the other edge if you want. And I like to actually put the bottom tape first because that's going to it's going to allow me to see that it's parallel to that top edge and create a more perfect square, right? Let's see here. And then we'll do the sides now. Okay. Now the sides are going to be easy because we have the 2 points here. Let's put a little dot where the sides are. Just like that. Here we go. And just run it down like so. Right, and you can make your adjustment if it's a little bit crooked. And that's the key about using artist tape is that it doesn't rip. It doesn't rip the paper. And I'm using a heavyweight watercolor paper, by the way, in case you're wondering. All right. And just enough for the side, and we're off and running. I am so excited to do this. Let's imagine that we got hired to do this commission, to do this really great record cover. A great jazz band or musician. There we go. That's a little bit off. Let's make the adjustment and make it a little wider. There we go. That's looking good. All right. So now we can paint right to the edge, right? And we don't have to worry about that tension at the edge coming close to it. Okay. Wonderful. Now let's go ahead and draw our composition here. I'm keeping the thumbnail in mind, right? Keeping this off to the side here so we can reference it. Okay, and just have it here to the left, and also taking a look at our reference. And I'm just going to draw right into it, right? So I'm going to draw in nice and light, really. If you want, if you're concerned about the overlap, my intention is to overlap some of the line work because I think that's going to look pretty cool. So think about the marks and interesting ways to make them. But for now, I think what's key is just creating the major shapes that we see. So we have the side of the guitar here, and I'm just looking at the reference as well. And this comes around and loops about halfway. It looks like it's almost about halfway to about there, right? In our thumbnail, right? Because I'm looking at the thumbnail and I'm looking at where the halfway points are, right? Vertically and horizontally. And just paying attention to that, right? And then the neck is the next thing. So that's going to allow us to figure out approximately where that neck is going to go. And it's going to go right off the edge, just like that. I think that's going to look really cool that it's going to run right off of that edge, just like that. Okay. And we have the side. You don't have to worry about so many details for now because really you're just establishing the composition. But if you want to add a few details just so that you get familiar with where things are placement wise, that's always helpful. So I'm gonna draw the side of the body just like that. You know, I might make an adjustment here, for example, and bring this up a little bit, just like that. So that's, you know, you can always erase that, or you can always paint right over that. Okay, and then you have the board coming right off of here, right? And we won't worry about the strings and the fret and all of that stuff for now. I think the most important thing is we have one of the major subjects right here on the page, and it's true to our sketch, right? Our thumbnail. All right. Now, let's add some of the other players here, some of the other ingredients here. Let's put the drum set in. I think that's important, so that way it'll anchor the design, right? So looking at the reference here, let's switch over to our drum set, and let's put the kick drum, you know, let's just draw the circle right there. And if you want it to come off the page, I think that's pretty interesting as well. And then, so that's the kick drum. It kind of, there's a little bit of volume behind it. You can kind of see the side of it a little bit. And then you have the rest of it. You have the other drums here. Drawing a circle for the bottom, for example. And keep your lines nice and loose and relaxed. Don't worry about it being too precise, right? If you want to draw more of a gesture line, that works as well. And let's see here. Let's take a look at the drum set. So we're keying in on the drum set. There's another snare drum right behind it that sits right there. There's a towel that sits on top of it, but it's pretty similar in shape to the other drum here, right? And let's draw the stands. I think it'd be good to have the stands just kind of end almost at the bottom like that. And then we have the cymbals, the hi-hats, for example, kind of off to the right like that. And I love this overlap. I'm going to go ahead and emphasize that. I really think that's important to have that overlap. It's going to create an interesting rhythm. And then it kind of touches the guitar, or at least almost touches it. There's a little bit of shape to it as well, like that. right? So that's already an interesting composition, right? And pretty close to our thumbnail so far, right? If you look at the two, it's pretty close. So let's hold this so you guys can see, right? All right, it's looking good. Now, what else can we add? We have some mics that are coming in from the side. So I think that's pretty neat that it's kind of coming off of the page and into the composition. It's always good to include elements that if you are going to include elements that are coming off the page or coming into the design area, into the composition, to have them pointing into the composition, into the frame rather than out. And the reason why that's important to do that is because you're leading the eye, you're leading the viewer to look into this composition, and that's important. All right, and then we have another mic that comes up from the top, like so, and then maybe comes off the edge like that, and then the wires come down like that. And remember, you can scale things larger or smaller if you want to play around with them. The key is just to play around, to really just experiment with it and find some interesting things. And the left side here, remember, I'm purposely overlapping things, so it's going to be really interesting when we draw it, how that's going to look. So we do have, let's see here, a few mics. I won't add too many, and there's one more drum off to the left here. So I'm going to include that just like I have in my composition, in my thumbnail, right? Just like that. Okay, so now we have the full drum set. We have a hi-hat here. We don't have to include all of this, but just in case, let's go ahead and put this hi-hat right here. See how it looks. It's not too intrusive, right? All right, and don't worry if it looks a little busy because we can kind of push things back, and I kind of want it to look a little bit like a collage, a little bit like they're, it's full of instruments on the stage. Right, so now we have the two instruments left. We have the stand-up bass and the saxophone, right? So I'm going to go ahead and draw the saxophone right here off to the left. If we look at our thumbnail, right? It's right there, just kind of at a curve, this diagonal, really. It's just coming down like that, right? That's the diagonal that we're seeing. And I'm just going to draw the rest of it here. Just a nice curve, it curves up. So, and just draw the shape of it. It's okay if you just draw the outline of it. It does not have to be perfect because remember, we're going to be casing this in, blocking it in with ink or with colored pencil, if you'd like, whichever you're most comfortable with. And then the neck here, that's really important. I kind of like it to go off the page, especially this nice curve just goes right off the page like that. That's pretty interesting composition. All right. And last but not least, we have our stand-up bass, our jazz guitar or jazz bass. And first I'm going to draw the neck of it so I know approximately where it's going to fall in the composition. Just right there is fine. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw the width of it like so. This is one of my favorite parts of the stand-up bass, is that little curly cue in the neck. I love drawing that part. And then the rest of the body. So just drawing the outside frame, right? You can expand it if you want. You can make it more narrow. You can play around with the scale of it if you want. Really, the key here is just you're having fun playing around with the shapes, and you're not worried about it being too precise. You can make adjustments, for example, if you drew something a little too narrow, too wide, you can make those adjustments with your pencil. All right, so far so good. And then the side of the body, that's important. Let's put that in there, right? That's going to give it some dimensionality if we add the side of the body like that, and it tapers down like that. So just like that, look at that composition. It's so great. I kind of want to add something here, but you know what? I like that negative space, a little bit of that breathing room that we talked about, that negative space. So I was going to add some of the microphones that are pretty tall, but I like the balance here. It's a little bit busy here. There's a nice rhythm to the drawing here, and then it's kind of open, right? Think of it as music notes, right? Kind of up and down, and then different variations in intensity. That's the way we want the drawing to feel, especially when we're drawing something that is jazz related, right? So far, so good. Lots of improvisation. We have our two thumbnails. Chose this one, looking good. All right, so you have a choice here, right? You can go ahead and start splashing around some watercolors, some gouache if you want. Um, my instinct is telling me I kind of want to do a fun um, pencil drawing, right? To really kind of case in the drawing because I love how spontaneous this looks. I love how this drawing looks. So I'm going to take some of my color pencils and put this thumbnail aside for a second. Okay. And I'm just going to grab our colored pencils here, and I'm just going to pick a few colors, maybe something that has some pastel, maybe some brightness to it, some intensity to it. I like this red, orange, and this turquoise. Yeah, so that works for me. Just have to pick a few colors, right? Let's sharpen them up. There we go. And then the orange. And then I'm just going to use the pencil line that I already have to make an interesting drawing with some different line work, right? And think about interesting marks that we talked about and ways to make them. So we're going to begin to identify our key elements here. And this, the drawing develops. So the drawing is going to start to develop now towards our creative direction. What's going to happen is because we're working very intuitively and very spontaneously, really the direction of the drawing, we're sort of collaborating with the idea of it. It's developing as we speak, as we're adding more and more marks. Right? It's almost like we're just along for the ride, and almost it's not unlike playing music, really, not unlike playing jazz. We're just kind of seeing what happens and inventing the language as it happens. So let's use this turquoise for the guitar that we have. Okay, and I'm just going to use the pencil line I already have, but I'm going to be a little bit more firm with the marks, a little bit more solid to kind of key into the shape of it and really start to define it, right? So I'm looking at some bigger and bigger shapes and more detail and thinking of refining the overall drawing. But just keeping it nice and loose, really, keeping the drawing still nice and loose and free. Isn't that great? We get to play around today and we get to draw today and we get to just be curious and experiment with our art supplies and see what happens. This is my favorite way to draw, really just spontaneous. I like this color a lot, so I'm going to keep going with it and just see what happens. And I'm just choosing some of the bigger details in there for now. The fretboard, I'm going to go ahead and put in there. And then the guard, catch guard comes down like this. It's a beautiful instrument. Oh. And then the knobs, let's put the knobs in. I think that's important, right? Few dials here and there. Okay. You can make adjustments if you want, like the guard I want a little bit larger. So that's a little bit more of shape, the shape there. Plug here. Great. And we have the other side. We have the cutout. It's always really fancy. It's always beautiful. Like the cutout in a jazz guitar, classic guitar, or in our stand-up bass guitar, right? It allows the music, the sound quality to really be enhanced, right? And if you want, sometimes I like to add a few marks, not just to add texture to it, but really just to give me an idea of where something sits in space, to add a little bit of volume to the piece, right? And then the neck of the guitar, the fretboard, the neck just goes right off the page, right? It just runs right off the page, just like that. And that's where all this tape is helping us, right? We can go right off of that page and not worry about having that tension stopping to the edge. Just like that. I love that. That looks great. So now I'm going to put this pencil aside. I'm going to use the red and orange now for the rest of our instruments because they're going to be coming forward. And that's why I chose the cool color for the guitar. So let's go ahead and add. I like the red. This is a primary red for the saxophone. So let's do that. And keep the line moving. Just keep it nice and free, the way you would do a contour line. And with a contour line, we always talk about that, how important that is to practice your contour line drawing. And that's just drawing the outside edge of an object, right? You're just kind of following along the outside edge and defining the overall shape of it. Sometimes along the way, I like to add a few details to give us an idea where we are in some of the line work. These saxophones are really beautiful. They're so interesting to draw. There's so many different details to them. And I won't get lost in the details. There we go. That looks great. Look at that red and blue. Isn't that cool? It's looking great. Okay. So far, so good. Well, let's adjust the lighting so that it's not too bright. There we go. That's perfect. Okay. Now I'm going to keep going with this color because I like that it's advancing in the composition, right? I'm going to draw the stand-up bass using the same color. Draw the outside contour line drawing, just like the saxophone and the guitar. Now, if your drawing is a little bit wonky, it's not that accurate, good. That's what you want. You want it to be just free. You don't want it to be too precise, too perfect. You want things to be very free and just have a lot of personality and just trust that your line is good. Just go with it. Right? So let's add a few details here and there to give us an idea where we are with it. Side of the body here in the front. Papers off. And then the bridge here that connects the strings. And then the cutouts. Just draw a line and then kind of widen it if you want. And this cutout is almost hidden to the side there. And then the strings, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It comes down here just like that. You don't have to include all the strings. I just want to give you an idea where it is on the page. Okay, great. Now let's do the orange for the drum set. Okay, so let's take a look at the drum set and go ahead and case that in. I'm just going to go from left to right with this orange. This is a color called Flame. That's an awesome name for a color. And just like the stand-up bass and all the other instruments that we drew, we're going to go ahead and make a very simple line drawing with that, right? And we have the other drum set here, snare drum here, and then we have Tommy just sitting out here. There's 3 total, like so. Then we have kick bass right in the front. Nice circle. Kind of frame it. I'm just drawing a little bit of the side. You can kind of see a little bit of the side and give it some volume, give it some depth. And if you can't see, just go ahead and put it right on top. If your lines are a little bit light, like I drew them here, just put it right on top, just like that. Okay, and then the other snare drum, and this is what's great about what's happening here is I'm just going with the flow. You know, it's almost like you and I, you know, we are just up there on the stage and we're kind of winging it. We're just playing. We're enjoying the instrumentation. We're enjoying the music and just going with it, going with the flow, right? And just trusting it, trusting the process. We always do. So this is really about trusting the process. Then we have the mics. I'm going to switch over to my blue, my turquoise actually, and then just add some of the mics in that are dropping in off the page and into the composition. Kind of reminds me of how the Beatles recorded their albums with drop mics. I think that's the best way to record music. Great, there we go. Look at that. Fantastic. I love how loose this is. Already, this feels like, doesn't that feel like a record cover already? Fantastic, right? And we haven't even added any color yet. There's so much we can do to this, but it already feels very musical. It feels really cool, right? So you can add as much as you want to this. You can simplify it as much as you want. But what I'd like to do is, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I am going to, let's see if I can find my eraser. There's a little bit of, there we go. So I'm going to just erase the pencil line at the top here, just so that we refine the guitar shape better. Just like that. That's looking good. And what's great is we have, now that we have the colored pencil line, we can take out the graphite with a kneaded eraser or just a regular eraser to really start to case in the shapes, block in the shapes, just like that, and clean it up a little bit. You don't have to do that. You can leave that pencil line in there if you want. And also, like I said, you can go right into inking it as well and doing that, right? So I I'm tempted to either do a watercolor and add some washes or add a little bit of ink. Let's see here. First vote, either watercolor or ink. Let's see in the chat what you guys choose. What do you think? A little bit of inking right now or watercolor first? That's how spontaneous we're being. And just the first vote in the chat wins it. And ink. All right, great. Thank you. So let's go ahead and do that. And that's how improvised we are today. We're just going to go with the flow and see what the crowd thinks. Let's go with a little bit of ink. The good choice. I was kind of leaning towards that too. I'm going to put my ruler aside here. And a couple of things. I have my stick and my dip pen. I'm going to have so much fun with this. I have my waterproof ink, right? And we're not going to retrace the whole thing because we love the color, right? So let's go ahead and think about this for a second and pause for a second. What's working? What do we really love? We love the color. We love the line work. So I want to keep that integrity. And then I want to add just a few bits of line work just to really make things more varied, to give it some line variation, different intensity. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just use a kind of bolder line and pick something here that's going to make it more expressive. Now be careful if you're working with ink, because it can get too heavy too fast, but it's okay. We are just playing around and see what works. I love the stand-up base. I want to make sure that it's really up front and center, and that you can see the outline of it. So maybe what we'll do is we'll add just a line like that, and that's going to give us a beautiful kind of flowy line to it. Love that. And look at the variation in the line. That's very playful, right? That's pretty cool. And I'm just going to bounce around and see what happens, but I don't want it to get too heavy. The key here is I want to keep that looseness to the drawing. It's really important. Let's put the knockout in ink too. That's pretty. Let's do the other one. Let's do a little bit less ink. Not too heavy. Just so it's nice and playful. Just like that. And I'm gonna just trust my instinct, right? Just trust it. It's telling me, be careful, don't get too heavy too fast. Just keep it playful. So I'll just add a few lines here and there to really make it interesting. Now we have a lot of line variation, right? It's interesting when we think about marks and just interesting ways of making them. We've beginning to define some of the key elements, and the drawing kind of develops, and the creative direction just kind of happens as we go along. That's what I love about drawing this way, is really just kind of collaborating with the idea of it as it develops. Just working more spontaneously, more actively that way, it becomes more energetic. Right? So let's keep going. I'm going to emphasize the saxophone a little bit, and I like the line variation, so maybe we'll do that with the dip pen to keep it a little bit more fine line. But I love this bold line that this stick is making, so I'm going to add this to the guitar. I think that's interesting to do that. And just have it come right off the page like that. And maybe the bottom half of it, just making this nice kind of curved line. And maybe just defining some of the background drums, for example. Not too much, because I want to just keep the eye moving, really. Just keeping it moving around in the composition. Keep kind of bouncing around like that. Okay. This is so much fun. I am having so much fun doing this. It's just, I can work like this every day and be happy. Look at that. So that's coming together nice, right? It's got this really openness to it, right? It feels a lot like the music too. So I do want to add, let's try this because I want to add the bass of the guitar, the bottom of the guitar where it's sitting, kind of imagining that it's sitting on the surface. I mean, it kind of looks like it's floating out in space, but that's pretty cool. And it's flying, our flying guitar. And then maybe just some shadows just to give it something a little bit identifiable, like on the fretboard and on the neck here. And it's going to give us just some detail like that. Great. Right? So I'm done with that. I don't want to add any more. I like that line variation. I like the thick and thin. And now what I want to do is, I'm so good at smudging ink, I'm going to wipe the tip off of here, the stick, before I put it down. I think I have ink somewhere in all of my clothing, even my nice clothing. That's okay. All right, so now I'm going to use my dip pen, right? Sparingly. I'm not going to use it all throughout because I want to keep that color. I love that color in the background. We might lose a little bit of it when we do the wash. But this is really going to tell us this, using this more detailed line work with the ink is going to tell us the direction, right? So for now, I want to just detail a little bit of the drum set so that we don't lose it. And I'm just putting a little bit more information in there, right? Based on the reference that we have, just so that it's a little bit more identifiable. And I'm not going to case in detail for detail, all of it. And that saxophone is important. I really want that to exist as a main ingredient in the composition. So I'm going to define the edge a little bit with this pen. You can see it's a little bit more of a fine line. It's more precise, of course, than our stick. Our found stick, I shaved the end of it so that it would take ink a little better. And so far it's worked for me. It's a pretty fun thing to draw with. Kind of a perfect subject matter really to draw with for this album cover. Right, so far so good. I love that. And I love this red, so I won't lose it. I don't want to lose all of that. So maybe just where my instinct tells me to kind of add a few details here and there. I love all the little pegs and circles and squares here in the instrument itself. The circles kind of bounce around throughout. There's another one right here. Connect somehow. There we go. So I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, and you can see it's got a nice rhythm to it. It's really starting to feel very musical, right? And sometimes I like to add a few details so that it gives it some depth, like the side of the drums, for example, some of the ribs that come back push towards the back of the instrument, right? All right, so let's give this a few seconds, maybe a minute to dry. It dries pretty quickly. Let's see if it smudges just a tad. It's okay if we smudge it, in fact. Play around with that, by the way, if you want to smudge some of the ink. Let's go ahead and do that, since we're talking about that and how it's okay to do that. So let's say you accidentally smudge it, right? Whoops. Oh no. We ruined it. No, we didn't. Let's be purposeful about that smudge. let's see what happens when we do that. Right? And that's what it's all about. Just kind of opening up the graphics and playing around with it, seeing what happens. Okay, won't do too much there. I waited so that it's a little bit more dry so that it won't smear that line work. Okay, that looks pretty cool. All right. We can always come back to some of that detail and refine it when we want. All right. So it's nice and dry now. And I know because I smudged it on purpose. There's actually a way to tell if it was dry now. Let's go with some watercolor, right? Let's pick some watercolors here. I like a more, say, modern palette. So let's choose some really vibrant colors here. Let's go with an orange, maybe a little bit of red, and maybe some midnight blue or royal blue. For some reason, whenever I think about jazz, especially bebop, which is my favorite type of jazz, I think of royal blue. I make these color associations. I think of midnight blue or royal purple when it comes to classic traditional jazz. I don't know why. I think it just feels like that. Maybe it's has to do with one of my favorite albums. All right. So I have a couple of brushes here. Don't worry about the brushes. You can use round brushes or square brushes, right? Whatever you feel like using. I'm going to use the square brush because I think that's interesting. It's going to be interesting to make both um, kind of straight marks with the paint and straight, and then something's kind of moving around with a little bit more energy. So I'm going to turn this way. And I'm going to add a lighter color first, a little bit of orange. And you guys know I like to mix my colors. I don't like to use it straight from the pan, even though if I'm using a nice watercolor set, I love the colors of the set, but sometimes I like to mix my colors and create my own. Makes it way more personal. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to keep this just nice and loose, just like everything else. This is not where we're going to tighten up here. We're not going to do that. We're just going to keep it very playful. Things are going to overlap. It's going to move the ink around and the colored pencils around. That's okay. Perfectly okay. You can splash it around. You can kind of, just see where it goes. See what your mind is telling you, right? That's a beautiful yellow that we have, yellow orange that we have. And I want to make this bottom half here, the bottom left side, a little warmer with some red. Just some different marks here and there. Loving how this looks. Okay. Just like that. Right? Just letting it kind of drop out. If something's telling you, hey, that kind of looks interesting, trust it. This is all about getting familiar with that instinct, your creativity, your artistic instinct. That's so important to have and so important to trust it. It's almost always right, believe me, right? Um, I love that red so much. I won't use it too much, but I'm tempted to just do this and just create a line that just comes up. Let's soften it up a bit and drops down like so. There we go. Just like that. And that's enough red. I don't want it to be too warm. I think that looks great. Now that blue, speaking of that blue, let's make a really beautiful royal blue. Okay, I'm going to add my own colors to this. little bit of red. So now we have a nice kind of purple, dark purple, and using that same color palette and soften it up a little bit. There we go. So we have two different cooler colors that we can use wherever we want. Still using the same brush, really. Right, so I'm going to dry the brush a little bit, just a tad, and use this purple for the side of the guitar, for example. Just in some key areas that I want to play around with, right? Adding a little bit more color to it. Isn't that a beautiful color? Look at that. It's almost a midnight blue. It's really working. Just adding it to some spots here and there, keeping it nice and loose. Like everything else is just nice and free and very spontaneous. Like keeping the paint, the marks that we're adding with the brush, very similar to how we were drawing, right? And I want to add some color around the saxophone so we can see a little better. Just like that. It's looking good. And then maybe, where else? What do you guys think? Let's add it to the dropouts. That's important. Just to kind of give it a suggestion where it's there, right? And I want to balance this out because it has a lot of warm colors in it. I'm going to add it this upper left-hand side here using a little bit more of a dry brush, not too much water in there. Just like that. And remember that blue that we made, that beautiful blue, just right up here. I'm just refreshing it. Okay, just activating a little bit more. Let's put that right there. If you want, you can kind of let the water just kind of drip down like so. Right. Keep the wash just nice and loose. Just adding it where we think it needs it. A few bits here and there. Great. All right, so far so good. Now, let this dry. Don't overwork it. And that's really usually what I see with watercolors is people kind of overdo it and make it too muddy. You want to keep the purity of the color there. You want to keep it intact. And that the key to that is just, you know, applying glazes, applying one layer at a time and letting it set and letting it dry with each layer, right? So we're kind of approaching the finish here in our last half hour. So what's important is to think about how we're going to finish this, right? So we have this line drawing that we've established first. Let's pause for a second, think about it while this is drying. And then we have our washes that we added, kind of balancing out the light and darks. And so then we have our line work with our ink. And that's creating a nice kind of painterly composition here. What I'm thinking I want to do for the last bit to reach our finish is we have our markers and we have some pastels. I probably want to finish with the pastels. I have an idea with that. I'll show you. The markers, let's see, it might get a little bit heavy, but it'd be interesting to add a few things with the markers because it's always you know, one of the most vibrant colors that you can add in a composition, especially on paper. Is it just hops right off the page. And some colors I have here, it's very bright, so we can add that. So I can think about where I want to add that. But for now, while this is drying, what I do want to do also is to refine some of the edges that we lost, like some of the detail that we lost, to bring them back into the picture, right? So I'm going to go back to my colored pencils. I'm not going to add any more ink because I love just the right amount of ink that I see here. Right, so I'm going to set my watercolors aside for now. I think I might be done with the watercolors. And now I'm going to choose maybe a darker color, just slightly darker. In fact, this is a green, just a shade darker than the turquoise that we had. And I try not to use straight black with anything, especially with line work, unless it's a black ink, because it can get pretty heavy. So let's see, let's see if we have maybe a blue, a dark blue with our pencils, or maybe just a purple that will work. So we do have, yeah, we do have one here. Great. And then we have another purple. Yeah, that works. Okay, great. So let's do that. I'm going to use these colors here, maybe not all of them. I have a purple, a green, and a dark red. So let's use that for kind of refining some of the detail that we lost. And so just give it a few minutes. Just in the time that we were talking about where this is going to finish. If you're not sure, just kind of touch it and you'll feel if it's still cool to the touch, that means it's still a little bit wet. But if you want, you can kind of pat it dry. And that's for sure is going to dry it up nice. And you can kind of play around with the paper towel because you can lift some of that wash up if you want to lighten some areas. All right, so that's looking great so far. Looking very like an album cover. Actual album covers happening, guys. This is so exciting. So let's get back to drawing and bringing this back and making it come alive again. So you see how we lost a little bit of that detail there. Let's go ahead and kind of lasso that back in. And this is going to be fun because I have this nice kind of forest green. It's called racing green, but it's basically a dark green. And this is going to allow me to bring back some of that detail that we kind of lost in the watercolor. You see how that looks more refined, right? We can kind of identify it a little bit more. And then the bridge, let's get that back. And here's where you start to play around with some details, with some texture and marks if you want. You can start to think about different types of marks. And just have fun with this. Just with anything that you do, just play around with it like we've been doing. See what happens. And I love how that blue, that first layer of line just is coming through with this. And here I'm just refining along the way what my gut, just listening to my instinct, just trusting it. Right. Let's draw the guard here on the body that we kind of lost a little bit. The side comes up and over just like that. And you see how it's coming back forward now, right? Isn't that cool? And so that's why I always say don't be scared when you're adding that watercolor wash, as long as you don't get too heavy and too intense with the washes. You will, it will fade a little bit, your initial kind of pencil lines, but you can always bring it right back and start to reel it in again. Okay, you could even draw some of the frets here that we have, just to give us an idea. Right, and some of the knobs, let's change the color, that'd be interesting. I'm going to use this purple for some of our knobs that are sitting right on top of the guitar guard here. I'm using this purple. Well, that's really works as a complement to the red and orange there. So that looks really neat. And let's use the same purple since we have it in hand. Let's go ahead and use it for the side of the body to create a little bit of a tone. Some interesting marks there, like that. And that's it. I think that's all I want to do for this jazz guitar, basically floating out into space, drifting out away from all the other instruments. That looks really cool, right? And remember that orange we had? I'm going to use the same red orange, but I'm going to add a little bit more red to it to kind of bring it out into the open, to bring it forward a little bit. So here I'm just using a dark, this is a primary red, to just kind of bring it forward, kind of re-emphasizing the line work there, right? And I like that things are kind of fading in and out. It makes me think about music and notes and how not every note, especially with jazz, it's important that you're almost in a way making up notes as you go along, making up the choreography or the composition as you go along. And just kind of shuffling between the different colors just to push things back, pull things forward, right? And seeing what happens when I do that. And it's all very spontaneous because things come up that are really interesting. Like I like the overlap of some of the instrumentation, so I'll play around with that. It almost looks like a halo on this stand-up bass. That's really interesting. And I love the red in the side of this, so I'm gonna use that to create some tone on the side of it. Okay. So far, so good. So we're almost there. And I kind of want, let's make this bottom half here a little heavier, this guard. It pulls the strings, this bridge, so that it gives us a base, the stand-up base, so that it sits nice on the composition. It sits right there on the bottom of the page. It sits well. Okay. And I do want to bring in those mics, so I'm going to use a kind of darker, this is I think a burnt umber. It brings those back into frame. So I didn't think it was going to come forward as much as it is now, but I really love how some of that initial line work that we added, some of the light colored blue and red and orange, it's still intact. It's still there on the composition. And I'm kind of drawing around it, really. I'm not drawing directly on top of it to cover it, and I think that's really helping to keep that color there. And I'm not retracing all of it, so that keeps that blue, for example. It keeps it intact. Okay. And just kind of bounce around and see what feels right. And the key is just taking your time. You almost work, in a way, ironically, you almost work faster when you just kind of walk it down and think about it for a second rather than just rushing in. It's almost a balance of being spontaneous and being improvisational and considering the rhythm of the drawing and the pace of the drawing. That's really fun to think about. All right, so that looks good. So let's pause here. Always pausing to just consider where the direction it's going to go, where the rest of it's going to go. I want to add, been dying to add some of these pastels. I think it really make the composition pop, and it would be a great way to add a finishing touch, right? So just to kind of recap, at least towards the end here, what we've done and some of the things we worked on. You know, what's funny is that infusing spontaneity is something that I wish more people would do, because it's so playful and so fun and so energetic. It's a great way to draw and to paint, really, to do anything that you do artistically, is just to add spontaneity into it. You know, the unexpectedness of the changes sometimes can intimidate you, but that's really what I savor, what I embrace, is that the changes that happen, the surprises that happen, create very distinct artwork. I think that the reason why that happens, that it makes it interesting for me, is that it makes it very individual and gives it identity. But it also allows you to just be welcome to the change and accept it for what it is, and adapt to it and make the proper adjustments to that change. All right, so the finishing touch, we have lots of options. You can go really full with the details with colored pencils. You can add a little bit more ink work if you want. It's really up to you how much you can go in watercolor. For me, I'm going to decide to add some bits of color with the pastels, right? So I have this super bright yellow. I'll just kind of lay them out here. And let's see here, kind of going with the flow and see what happens here. I have this kind of turquoise that's interesting. That's been working. It feels a little bit summery, right? The color palette. I like that a lot. I even have some lilac and maybe pink. Been using a lot of pink in my paintings. It's a great color. There we go. Not too many. Let's see how that works. And I like this blue, kind of tone it down a little bit, because I do like blue. Maybe replace this turquoise. Or maybe just take away this pink here. And there we go. I think that's what I want to finish with. Let's see what happens, right? Let's see how we feel about that. Okay, so first I want to do just some yellow. Where do I want to add some yellow? I like the side of it, using the side of it to really make an interesting texture, right? And just in spots. In fact, I want to use it for kind of like a highlight to make things really pop, right? So maybe even on the side of the cello where it kind of shines, right? Because it's got a finish varnish on it. And then maybe on the side of the drum kit. See how it's okay to just go right on top of the overlap. That's perfectly okay. In fact, everything else is overlapping, so it's okay to do that, you know, here and now. Right. That looks great. So I like that yellow. It's what I imagined. So just putting this aside and really just using the same paper towel I had. I like this pink. I'm going to use it sparingly because I want to add it so much, but I want to make sure I don't cover too much with it. And that's what's great about the tape, right? You can just go right on top of it, and you can go right to the edge, and it's no big deal. Maybe on the snare drum, just a little bit here, the hi-hat. Okay, I like that. That's just the right amount, right? And you can see I'm just adding some touches here and there just to give it a little bit of a flourish at the end. And maybe this blue, I like this blue a lot. So this kind of royal blue. And you can kind of soften it up too. That's what's great. You have some lighter blues here and bring it right down into the piece if you want. You can kind of smudge it too and play around with that. And maybe right here. Just like that. And last but not least, this kind of turquoise that we've been using, I'm going to add it to the outside of this guitar just to make it interesting. And even smudge it like that. And then I haven't used any kind of thin vertical stroke, so I want to add that here and there. Just kind of running off of the page and then smearing it this way and that way. Just to give it some texture that's interesting, right? Just like that. So I'm feeling like that's a good place to leave it alone, let it breathe, and see what we think, right? So let's set our pastels aside. Pastels can really create a mess. So it's good to test it out if you have some, because we're mixing up the media here. Good to really experiment, to take out a piece of paper and just play around with your different media, because you'll learn if something is something in the style that you work in. Sometimes if you don't mind getting messy, for example, then you don't mind using pastels or chalk or charcoal, because it does kind of get everywhere. But I love this part because we get the big tape reveal, right? So I'm just going to wipe off the edge a little bit, just kind of clean it up, clean up our board, just like that. And look at that. Beautiful, right? And we have, like I said, we have some options. It's really up to you how much you want to detail this towards the end. We have our colored pencils and pastels and more ink and markers. I do have some markers here that I thought I was going to use, right? So, you can use some white, for example, if you wanted to use some dropout. This is really thick, so I'm not sure if I'm going to use that. And it's just if you wanted to create some highlights, that's really going to sit right on top of anything. That's the key with markers, is that they generally will sit on top of anything that you've used before. That's how opaque they are. You can come in with gouache or acrylic and touch up some things if you wanted to do that. But I feel like this is where I want it to be for now. And sometimes it's a good idea. People always ask me, how do I know when something is finished? A good practice to do is to let something breathe, just to take a pause and pull away from it a little bit, or maybe even leave it overnight and see how you feel the next day. Oftentimes when I do that, I come back to the piece and I look at it and I think, you know what, it's done. I think it doesn't need it anymore. So let it breathe, let it sit for a bit. But now one of my favorite part, the tape reveal. We get to see what it looks like. And this is what's great about the artist tape, because it doesn't rip up the canvas or the paper, right? So we have a nice straight edge that we can photograph. And you can reuse this. If it's not ripped up, it's okay. I like to reuse it. Right, just peel it right off. And look at that, it just comes right off paper. It doesn't rip it up. Let's pull this back a little bit so we can pull it apart. And look at how clean that edge is. Isn't that nice? It's almost camera ready. We're ready to produce our album cover. It's ready to go to press. Look at that. I'm gonna zoom in close here so you guys can see some of the detail of it. There we go. That's looking good. And now the top. Let's start from this side here. Oh. Like that. And voila, look at that. Amazing. We used, gosh, I can't even remember. We used so many different media. And there's the finish. So we used, let's recap here. Let's see. We used pencil, we used graphite, we used colored pencils, we used watercolor, we used some pastels and ink, right? I think that's 5 different medium that we've used for this. And let's look at it close. Look at how all those layers just come forward, right? And let's brighten it up here so we could see a little better, right? So you look, you could still see some of the initial drawing that we did that comes up to the surface, right? It comes right up there. And that's what I love about it. So that's why I wasn't too worried about whether the drawing was accurate or not, because you can really just start to refine it as you go. And how each and every layer really adds to the other, really adds to the character of the piece. And, sometimes I see it really clearly, see it as in I envision how the ending is going to be, where it's going to go. But that's great when that happens, but really I don't wait for that. I don't anticipate that. I don't have that expectation each and every time I draw and I paint. I love the unexpectedness. I love the nuance of it. I love the surprises of it. I like the spontaneity of it. That to me is the true joy really in making art. It's those discoveries that we make along the way. And I've discovered so much today doing this piece. Thank you so much for joining us. I want you to keep going and stay curious and remember to keep that drawing nice and loose and playful. And always, always remember to have fun. I'll see you all next time. I can't wait for our next class. Thank you so much for joining me.